Good afternoon. Welcome back to the summer term and to our latest live Q&A session. I can't believe how quickly this academic year is flying and we're already into the final term. For those of you who haven't joined the session previously, I'm Alex Hawkins, Director at EPM, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by a panel of colleagues from EPM, Avec and Southalls, all experts in their field. We'll be covering the full range of questions across all of the areas in the education division of EPM, which includes finance, governance, HR, payroll, pensions, health and safety and safeguarding. You'll hopefully receive from us the pre-recorded education update, which was launched late March, just prior to the Easter holiday. This is instead of the seminars we usually run face-to-face pre the pandemic countrywide. If you haven't received the email or had the opportunity to view the recording, then I'd really encourage you to take some time out and to review the sections. This time we put it together in bite-sized chunks so you can access the areas which are most applicable to you, hopefully making it far more user-friendly than previously. It covers such areas including safeguarding and recruitment practice, key April changes which impact on budgets, payroll and pensions, Harper versus Brazel case and an update on that, and the latest on the school teachers' paying conditions and support staff pay awards. Customers can access this from the webinar tab on schools.epm, and prospects can access it through the Education Insights April edition under Guides and Resources on epm.co.uk. In addition to answering more general questions through this session, the timing of this Q&A session is to provide you with the opportunity for questions to answer that may have arisen from the pre-recorded education update. If you have questions during this session, please use the box on the right-hand side of this page to post your questions. If we don't get time to answer all of them today, we will ensure that they're followed up afterwards and ensure you receive response to your query. So thank you to those who have submitted questions in advance. We've received quite a number and we'll endeavour to get through those plus questions that arise today. We're going to kick off the session with some of those questions to start with, including barred list checks and the up-to-date position, along with the summer school catch-up provision for pupils. So our first question that we've received is, now that standalone barred list checks are processed via the TRA website, what do we do if there is a possible match? Beth, can I hand this one over to you, please?
You can indeed. Hello, I'm Beth Alberger and I'm the Safe Recruitment Manager and Trainer here at EPM. Well, since the last education update, we informed you, albeit on the slide and not in the recording, that as of the 1st of April, the barred list function moved to the TRA website. However, EPM is a third-party provider and do not have legitimate interest, and the TRA and the DBS would not confirm if a possible match came up. You are now able to do this, and if a possible barred list does come up that it is a match, you will now need to email dbscost@dbs.gov.uk, titling the email Possible Match for the name of the individual. In the body of the email, you should state that you are an educational establishment and the name of your school, and as the employer, you have a legitimate interest in seeking clarification the person you are recruiting is not a match on the barred list. You will then be required to provide the full name of the employee to be recruited, any previous surnames, their date of birth, their address and their national insurance number, together with the job title of the employee or volunteer, and state whether the role is paid or not. You should also note that the person will not be supervised and will not have one-to-one contact with children. You will then receive an email, possibly within a week, thanking you for your email dated whenever it was that you sent it, at the time whenever you sent it, which your request for the barred list data of an individual. They won't state the name of the person, but they will go on to say, we can confirm that no match exists for this person on the current barred list. Note this information is based on the information that you provided. It will then go on to say, please note the check that we have performed is for the DBS barred list only. We are unable to carry out Disclosure Scotland checks. In order to be sure this individual is not on the Scottish barred list, you will need to receive the enhanced check for regulated activity. We would recommend you retain the original email sent to the DBS regarding the possible match and the email confirmation once received from the person stating that they are not a match. Now remember, you only need to do a standalone barred list check if you have not received the DBS certificate, which should include a barred list check before the person commences their appointment. You'll also need to be required to complete a risk assessment pending the return of the DBS check and update your SCR accordingly. So I hope that answers that question for you.
That's really great. It really does. Thank you, Beth. Our next question is one for Matt and is pensions related. Teachers' pensions end of year certificate. Do church-aided schools need to have the end of year certificate audited, even though they are LA maintained and EPM deal with the pension contributions? Matt, can I pass this one over to you, please?
Of course you can. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Lewis. I'm the Assistant Director of Payroll here at EPM. Thank you very much for the question. The end of year certificate, or as some of you may know, the EOYC is an annual audit exercise undertaken by employers to provide assurance that contributions which have been collected and submitted throughout the year are correct for TP. For the purposes of TP, the employer for a church-aided school is considered to be the local authority, and therefore they will usually take the lead on this process and will confirm any specific requirements. To support on this, the LA may require you to confirm contributions collected and submitted, particularly if your school does not utilise the LA for payroll and pension services. If you are an EPM payroll customer, the information is available using the Excel year-to-date pension report, which can be found in archived and other reports in the reporting section of the customer portal. If you're unsure of the EOYC process or what is needed for your establishment, then further information and guidance can be found in the For Employers section of the Teachers' Pensions website. All employers must complete an EOYC and return it to Teachers' Pensions by the last working day in May. It does not have to be audited at that point, but if it isn't, then it should be made available to your auditor by the last working day in June. As a reminder, the deadline for audited certificates needs to be returned to Teachers' Pensions on the last working day in September for non-LA establishments and the last working day in November for LA establishments. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks very much, Matt. I think he was in hiding that time from us. Really helpful answer, thank you. Now moving on, it's a health and safety related question for our next one. Can you help with updating the latest current advice for pregnant women and advice for a BAME soon to reach 28 weeks and also who cannot wear a mask due to asthma? She is currently working from home, but what should we do to ensure this is handled correctly? Simon, would you mind picking this one up, please?
Hi, thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
So hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Simon. I'm the consultant from Southalls. Yeah, so ultimately with anybody, any pregnant workers, you need to follow the guidance set out in the government's guidance document called the Coronavirus Advice for Pregnant Employees. Pregnant women are considered clinically vulnerable and in some cases clinically extremely vulnerable. For a pregnant woman who's less than 28 weeks with no other health conditions or factors that would make them more vulnerable, they should have a risk assessment completed to ensure it's safe for them to work in the school. We should look at factors like their ability to socially distance and comply with the other measures in your COVID-19 risk assessment. For pregnant women who are 28 weeks or more, or have other health conditions that make them more vulnerable, obviously more caution is needed. Ideally, they should work from home where possible, as is the case in with the person referenced in the question. But if they must work on site, you should make adjustments to ensure they're not at increased risk. And then finally, if you can't make these adjustments, then the employee should be suspended on paid leave. Now, it can be a complicated process. It can be a bit difficult. So you should firstly refer to government guidance provided on the NHS website, but also look at the guidance provided by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, because that can really help you identify the risk to the individual. But in any of these scenarios, if you're not confident in your ability to risk assess the individual, often due to the complexity of the individual circumstances, you should refer the employee to have an occupational health assessment completed, because they are the experts in this process, and then you've got some assurance there to follow in this process. Okay.
Thanks very much, Simon. Okay, moving on now. Can EPM provide any further guidance on the summer school catch-up provision for pupils from a context and staffing position? We've had a number of questions in this area. I'm just going to have a short run of them. Elaine, can I hand this one to you, please, to start off with?
Yes, certainly, Alex. Yes, my name is Elaine Hammond. I'm an assistant director in the HR advisory team at EPM. And as Alex says, we've had quite a number of questions on the summer schools already, and we're going to have a few questions from a number of us. So I'll just kick off on that one. So recent government guidance states that summer schools have been chosen because that provision with the academic focus has got the potential to support attending pupils to make up a lot of their missed education. And I believe it's the Education Endowment Foundation that finds on average pupils attending a summer school can make up to 2 months additional progress compared to pupils who do not attend, and actually it's up to 4 months if the summer school offers small group tuition led by highly trained and experienced teaching staff. So having the right staff in place really does make a difference in terms of the catch up that I know all of us are so committed to for the young children who have been hit by the pandemic. So the aim of the programme is to deliver a short summer school offering, and it should be a blend, I believe, of academic education and enrichment activities. And as you will all be aware, the summer schools, it's just one part of the educational recovery programme in terms of funding available to schools, but it's a key one that's very topical at the moment. So the guidance is very clear that it's optional for existing staff as to whether they engage with the summer schools. So specifically, the guidance states that summer schools are optional for staff and school leaders, and school leaders are best placed to determine the staffing that best suits their needs. So it's at local discretion in terms of who you need and at what level, as well as working with any of the other teachers who are available and willing to take part in the summer schools. School leaders may also wish to consider the alternative staffing options available to them. So the guidance refers school leaders using support staff where they think it's appropriate in terms of leading groups or covering lessons or using supply staff, using, for example, ITT trainees and volunteers. So in terms of pay, if your teachers do actually agree to take part in the summer school programme, the guidance refers you to the additional allowance paragraph. That's 26.1c in the school teachers pay and conditions document, and that provides flexibility for teachers to be paid for agreed, so out of hours learning activity. So that's a very generic clause that we use for lots of activities. It's been around for many years, and as I say, that's what the government is suggesting specifically is what you pay them under that heading. And then specifically the guidance states that payment for teachers who agree to participate in summer schools should be made at a daily or an hourly rate calculated by reference to the teacher's actual salary on their respective pay range. With the exception of head teachers, all teachers who volunteer to work in summer schools will be eligible for payments under that additional allowance clause, that paragraph that I've just referred to. You'll be picking up that I am talking about volunteers here, and it's optional. The wording in the guidance is very clear about on that point. I'm sure that a number of you are working in academies or trusts who are attending this session. So as you'll appreciate, academies aren't bound by the national terms and conditions, and so you have the freedom and flexibility to remunerate your teachers for any additional work that they do in any event, and you're not bound to adhere to the school teacher pay and conditions. Although I say that, I know a lot of you do follow that, hence us referring to that particular clause in the document itself. Just, I know it's a number of EPM customers attending, but for those of you who do use the EPM portal for payroll, for those ITT trainees, supply teaching staff and school, you could set them up on the EPM portal as casual unqualified teachers, and then allocate a day or an hourly rate to be paid. In terms of support staff, and other non-teaching roles, responsibility for determination of pay and conditions lies really at local level, and the government hasn't referred to what they should be paid and levels of pay. And it's really for head teachers and other school employers to really determine what you want to pay those staff and what's reasonable and fair. The terms for participation in the summer school should be agreed between you as the employer and your employees. clearly, as an HR person, I'm going to stress that it's really important that you make sure there's equity and consistency. It's absolutely key for that at all times in any pay and reward practices that you follow. So if existing staff are undertaking the role, their own role, or any more senior role, you need to clearly pay them at the rate that they're working at. For example, if they're an HLTA during the summer school, and they're normally an HLTA, then you could pay them at overtime in their own role. Or indeed, if they're not an HLT and they're a TA, you could set up a casual role for high-level teaching assistants. If you're recruiting external staff, you can set them up as casual workers at the correct pay as determined and agreed between yourself and the employee. So I hope this covers all scenarios in terms of pay, and I know that there's now a number of other questions that are going to be answered on summer schools as well, so I'll hand over to colleagues.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Okay, so the next question in the same area is one for you, Beth, really. Can you advise, please, on the operational or safer recruitment considerations for the summer school provisions, please?
Of course you can. So summer schools are operational for staff, and school leaders are really the best place to determine the staffing and best practice that suits their needs, as well as working with or any of their own teachers who are available and are willing to take part in the summer schools. School leaders may wish to consider following additional staffing options. So you should ensure that you have enough staff available to meet the required ratios for your setting. You should also have at least one person with first aid training, at least one person with up-to-date dedicated safeguarding lead, so that's DSL training. You may also want to consider having a deputy DSL to cover if the DSL is actually unavailable. And you also need to consider caretaking or cleaning staff if available. School leaders can be quite creative in their staff used for the summer school. There may be support staff willing to undertake, as Elaine has alluded to earlier on, with taking on the additional roles, or you may choose to use supply agencies or use the National Tutoring Programme or initial teacher training trainees. With the usual mentor oversight, trainees could, for example, take responsibility for a group of pupils, develop educational materials, deliver catch-up lessons, and also offer pastoral support. They could also be engaged in a wider professional activity, for instance, for supporting vulnerable children and young people. Initial teacher trainee partnerships will need to ensure that they have identified and comply with all the legislation and guidance relevant to initial teacher trainees. If appointing a person to cover these roles, you should carry out the appropriate pre-employment checks, and these are linked with Keeping Children Safe in Education Part 3 to assess their suitability to work with children. This should include a face-to-face interview that tests their motives for wanting to work with children, their values and ethics, as well as their emotional maturity and resilience, along with all the other pre-employment checks that you require. If your school or academy uses volunteers, then you'll need to ensure you follow Keeping Children Safe Part 3 again and complete the necessary risk assessment to determine if the volunteer will be engaged in regulated activity. And under no circumstances should a volunteer in respect of whom no checks have been obtained be left unsupervised or allowed to work in regulated activity. You should finally ensure that new staff members and volunteers follow protective measures you have in place to prevent the transmission of coronavirus, along with any behaviour and safeguarding policies to ensure they know what to do should a child or young person even, report any concerns. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, I think it does. Okay, moving on to the next question, again relating to the summer school programme. Specifically, will my school get funding for the summer school programme? Michelle, would you mind picking this one up, please?
Thank you, Alex. Yes. The Summer Schools programme is open to secondary schools. The DfE has said it's for schools to determine which pupils would most benefit from a summer school. However, it has also said that most will want to focus its provision primarily on pupils making the transition into Year 7. Schools can run a 1 or 2 week summer school, and funding will be made available to state-funded, secondary and special schools, non-maintained special schools and pupil referral units, and other alternative provision providers. schools will be able to sign up to the programme by completing an online form, and that's going to be made available commencing the 26th of April. Just found that out today. And at this stage, the DfE will only require confirmation that you intend to run a summer school, whether individually or jointly with another school. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Carrying on from that, one question received is, how is the summer school funding calculated? Are you able to pick that one up as well, please?
Yeah, no problem. The funding is based on the school's existing Year 7 cohort. Schools with a very small number of Year 7 pupils will receive no less than £1,000 should they choose to participate. If it's impractical for those schools with a small cohort to run a summer school, the funding allows them to work together with other local schools should they so wish. The DfE will provide funding to each school based on up to 50% of the Year 7 cohort being offered a place on a 2-week programme, or 100% of the cohort being offered a week-long programme. The daily rate for a pupil place is £59.70, which equates to £597 for a 2-week placement. It's £1,791 per place for pupils in special schools, special units within mainstream schools and alternative provisions. The funding will need to cover all the costs associated with the activity, such as premises, staffing, free meals for eligible children, transport and so on. So, for example, a school with 100 students in Year 7 could receive a maximum of almost £30,000. The school allocations were published yesterday, so you can have a look at that and see what your maximum funding will be. Back to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I've had a question come in which relates back to our pregnancy maternity question that Simon supported on earlier, but I think this one is probably one for you, Elaine, as it's got an HR spin on this. The question that's come in is, what do we do if we have a member of staff 28 weeks plus pregnant who chooses to stay in school if the risk assessment suggests they should work from home? Can you pick that up, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, again, we're continuing to get quite a lot of questions on pregnancy, and just following on from Simon's response earlier to the question on the 28 plus weeks pregnant case, you know, we heard that the employer is very much responsible for undertaking a risk assessment. It's the law, you need to undertake one. And whilst we understand it's, you know, and it's admirable for the individual to want to be in the workplace, you need to make sure it is safe. And under the health and safety at work regs, employees are responsible to control those risks, and those who are pregnant, there is deemed a greater risk. So we've got to be really careful there. And even if the employee says they wish to remain in the workplace, the risk as the employer, if you know that they are taking risks in there, then ultimately you could be liable if something were to be become amiss in terms of their pregnancy or for their health or the health of their child. So, I mean, whilst they wish to remain in the workplace and the risk assessment says they shouldn't be there, what you could be looking at is what other duties could they actually undertake? Could they be redeployed to another duty where you can alleviate those risks? Or even if it's part duties, you know, some of their duties might be all right, some of their duties may be risky. So could be that they actually attend work on a part-time basis, but their pay should remain on full pay in that situation as well. Could they work from home? We've had numerous people working from home. We've got IT solutions that are enabling people to work from home better these days as well. Appreciate it's difficult in a school environment, but it very much depends on the role that they undertake. And, you know, we've seen all teacher roles all the way through to every single support staff role just about being undertaken to some extent at home. So don't rule that out as well and use the IT solutions. Ultimately, you need to assess that risk, and if you feel it's too great for them to be there and the risk assessment is saying that it's not safe and you cannot identify any other alternative duties, then our advice generally would be to seriously consider suspension on full pay to make sure that you are not leaving yourself and the individual and their child at risk. Okay, back to you, Alex.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Okay, next question we've just received is one I think probably for Michelle. The question is relating to pupil premium rates and asking if they're going to change this year.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, I can answer that. No, the government has announced that pupil premium and service premium rates will remain unchanged for the financial year 21 to 22. However, there is a change in the census data that is used to calculate eligible pupils. So from this month, pupil premium allocations for mainstream and special schools will be calculated based on the number of eligible pupils recorded by schools in their census in October 2020 rather than in January as previously. This has been a bit of a controversial move. DfE have stated that they hope that using the October census for the pupil premium will give schools early certainty about the additional funding that they'll receive the following year. However, we work with a large number of clients whose pupil premium allocations have been impacted by this change, as schools have seen an increase in pupils eligible between October and January, and they'll need to wait until next October for the funding to flow through. In this transitional year, pupil premium allocations will be confirmed to the usual timeline in June 21. But from next year, allocations for mainstream and special schools will be published earlier in the year, giving these schools greater certainty around future funding levels earlier in the year. Allocations for alternative provision, pupil referral units and hospital schools will continue to be published to the usual timeline, as these will continue to be based on the January census. And there'll be no change in the payment arrangements for the pupil premium. The pupil premium grant continues to be paid in quarterly instalments. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks ever so much, Michelle. So our next question we've received is, what should our governing body do by focusing? What should our governing body be focusing on during the summer term? And should we be going back to face-to-face meetings? Obviously, those were suspended for quite a period of time during the pandemic, but we are sort of moving closer to some sort of normality. Michelle, is this one you could pick up again, please?
Yes. We're beginning to see that the role for governing bodies is settling down now and getting back to something we might have called normal before the pandemic started. During the summer term, we would expect governing bodies to focus on at least the following areas. Continue to focus on budget management and aligning funds to emerging needs. Continue to monitor the impact of specific funds, including catch-up premium. Looking at risk assessments, ensuring updates are in place. Looking at mental health and well-being, considering identifying perhaps a lead governor role. Looking at staffing arrangements for the coming academic year, and thinking about new developments, perhaps early career framework, that kind of thing. We'd also expect the majority of governing boards to take part in some form of annual review meeting, perhaps an away day event or additional session to reflect on the past year, review the progress and prepare strategically for the year ahead. This actually might be this event that you think about might be the first time that you bring your board back together in person. It's important to facilitate good discussion and engagement, give people plenty of notice and ensure that they're supported with any concerns about social distancing. And you might also use the summer term to undertake skills audits, consider membership of committees and look at training that might be required for governors or new governors. In terms of whether to return to face-to-face for all other governance meetings, we'd encourage you to discuss this with your governors and take their views on board. And we think the opportunities that remote sort of virtual meetings have brought should be built upon, and we envisage that more schools will develop perhaps a mixed solution to meetings, taking advantage of many different ways of working. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks ever so much, Michelle. Okay, our next question now is, what are the key points of the new early career teachers induction for newly qualified teachers, which comes into force from this September 2021? Shirley joins us from Avec. Shirley, would you mind picking up this question, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Shirley Carrick. Okay. What I'll do, the key points that we need to sort of be aware of for September. So the current term NQT, which we're familiar with, newly qualified teacher, this will be replaced by ECT, which is early career teacher. So the standard length of induction has been increased from 1 school year to 2 school years. The timetable reduction, which we're familiar with, the first year is 10%, but now the second year will be a reduction of 5%. The role of mentor has been introduced. So a mentor has a key role in supporting the ECT during the induction process and is separate to the role of induction tutor. There will be 2 formal assessment points, One will be midway through the induction and one at the end of the induction period. These will be supported by regular progress reviews to monitor progress to take place in each term where a formal assessment is not scheduled. The number of ad hoc absences permitted is being extended in line with the extended length of induction. In these circumstances, the induction period must be extended by the aggregate total of days absent. An ECT working 0.5 FTE will need to serve an induction for 4 school years. That's to give you an idea of the part-time FTE and what's required of them. So in cases where ECTs are working part-time and can demonstrate that they have met the teacher's standards, the appropriate body is able to reduce the length of the induction period and bring forward the final assessment point. This decision, though, is only to be made in agreement with the ECT, and once the ECT has completed a period covering completed a period covering but not equivalent to 2 school years. There'll be a monitoring programme of training that supports the ECT to understand and apply knowledge and skills set out in the early career framework. Regular one-to-one sessions from a designated mentor are to be undertaken. The mentor should hold QTS and be given adequate time to carry out the role effectively. The mentor should provide the ECT with regular mentoring sessions and training where appropriate. The induction tutor role is to provide support and guidance and coordination of assessment. The induction tutor should also hold QTS and have the necessary skills and knowledge to work successfully in the role and be able to assess the ECT's progress against teacher standards. ECT's teaching should be observed at regular intervals to facilitate a fair and effective assessment of the ECT's teaching practice, conduct and efficiency. So where observations are concerned, the ECT and observer should meet to review any teaching that has been observed with arrangements for post-observation review meetings made in advance. Feedback from the observation is provided in a prompt manner and is constructive with a brief written record made. Any written record will indicate where any development needs have to be identified. ECT should be kept up to date on their progress constantly. Formal assessment reports should be completed for both formal assessments. These reports should clearly show assessments of the ECT's performance against the teacher's standards at the time of assessment. For an ECT who has failed the induction period, the dismissal process will be followed. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks ever so much, Shirley. We've had a number of questions submitted from our audience today, but compared to previous sessions, it's been quite quiet. So please do feel free to use the chat on the side of the screen to submit more questions to us. We're keen to hear from you. Then moving on to the next question we've received, going back to summer schools again, Michelle, I think this is again one for you. The question we've received is, how do I claim for summer school funding?
Quite easy. In September, schools will be asked to complete an online claim form. This will be to confirm that the summer school took place, set out the total number of pupil days that were offered, and confirm the total number of pupil days that attended. Academies will receive their funding directly in the October funding round, and maintained schools will receive their funding via the local authority. There is also a full guidance document available on the DfE website setting out the full conditions of the claim along with the funding, but also something that perhaps you'd mentioned earlier, that schools can also look at using additional sources of funding as well when they're looking at arranging the summer school programme. So, for example, schools could use some catch-up premium or pupil premium, but of course should follow any conditions and reporting arrangements associated with them. Thanks.
That's great, thank you. Thanks so much, Michelle. Okay, so the next question we've received is looking for guidance on what to do in the event of a positive lateral flow test which keeps changing. Previously, the course of action was dependent on where the testing took place. What is the current procedure if one of our employees or students tests positive for COVID-19 when using a lateral flow test? Simon, could you pick this one up, please, with your health and safety hat on? Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's a really good question, because it is really important that people do follow the correct procedures whenever they do have a positive test for COVID-19. The guidance has indeed changed recently, a few times actually. Previously, it was a case of you needed a positive test, a PCR test. It was then clarified that that depended on whether it was a test conducted in school or at home, and it varied. But that's now been clarified again in the latest round of guidance. So it has been confusing, but thankfully now it's on a clearer path. So the main guidance you need to follow here is the coronavirus asymptomatic testing in schools and colleges document. That's the government guidance. It was updated at the end of March, and now it does explicitly state, and I'll read this bit, all positive results from rapid tests, whether conducted at home or at a school or college, need to be confirmed by a PCR test within 2 days of the positive lateral flow test. Following a positive lateral flow test, a confirmatory PCR test should be booked immediately, either online or by calling 119. Whilst awaiting the PCR results, pupils, students, staff and close contacts should continue to self-isolate. If the PCR test is negative, provided it was taken within 2 days of the positive lateral flow test, it overrides the lateral flow test and pupils, students and staff can return to school or college, and close contacts and other household members can stop self-isolating. If the result is positive again, obviously continue following the self-isolation guidelines. So thankfully, now that does make it clear that no matter where that lateral flow test is taken, whether it's in school or at home, you do have to have a confirmatory PCR test taken within 2 days. And then that PCR test result, that's the one to follow. Okay, thanks, Alex.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Simon. Okay, so next question is, as the pandemic continues to ease and restrictions start to lift, what sort of things should we be looking at in our schools to ensure our staff and students are safe? And perhaps, Simon, this is one to hand back to you for, please.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's another great question. This is something we've been pushing at Southalls for some time now. COVID-19 has obviously had a massive impact and has been the massive focus from a health and safety point of view, as well as obviously all the other implications. But it's also important to remember that the other hazards at school sites, they haven't disappeared. They're still very much present, and we have seen an increase in the number of accidents from things that would ordinarily, well, we would like to think would ordinarily be covered. So you know, we've been encouraging our clients to look beyond COVID-19 controls and look back at the other hazards on site. And as we enter the summer term, it's potentially a good opportunity to look back at your other hazards on site, your control measures, your health and safety management system, to make sure that everything else is in order. For some of those things you can look at, we always suggest review your maintenance inspections and services that you routinely perform on site or by contractors. A lot of those might have been postponed or missed, just from natural implications for contractors. You've probably found, if you have a Legionella risk assessment and Legionella assessors coming out to site, quite a lot of them have had to push back their visits due to massive backlogs. So it's really good to review those and make sure, if they have been postponed, you can encourage them to come back and do everything you reasonably can to get them back on site. Consider other tests. So you've got your fire alarm checks, thorough examinations of lifts and compressors. Secondary schools will probably have air compressors for a lot of their machinery. So those sorts of statutory inspections really do encourage you to get the contractors back in to conduct those tests. We also recommend performing documented checks on the equipment in-house. So things like your play equipment, sports equipment, trim trails, structures such as large shelters. Conduct regular checks on those. If they haven't been done for some time, now's the opportunity to get them done again, especially as we go into the summer months and a lot of that equipment is going to be back in more regular use. So look at, if we take trim trails as an example, look for things like fraying ropes, loose bolts, build-up of green mold, all the sorts of things that can contribute to a failure of that equipment or increase the likelihood of an accident that is easy to prevent and avoid. Also have a look at the condition of your site. Doing a site audit to make sure there are no obvious hazards around, like damaged drain covers, damage to play areas or flooring that could present a trip hazard. There was a recent prosecution only in the last couple of weeks of a school or a local authority where somebody fell over a small wall that was poorly lit, which unfortunately resulted in a fatality. So now is another good time to have another look at your site. And like I say, see if there are any of these obvious hazards that might have been overlooked in the past, but something that you can look at and get suitable control measures in place for. And then finally, looking at your health and safety management system as a whole. So look at your risk assessments, your policy. They should all be reviewed annually or at least regularly or whenever anything significant changes. Obviously, there have been a lot of changes happening because of the implications of COVID-19. So now would be a good time to review those documents to make sure that they are up to date. And yeah, it's sort of in a good position for you going forward as we hopefully leave the pandemic and get back to something that's more normal. Okay, thank you, Alex.
That's great. Thanks so much, Simon. The next question we have is pay related. So Matt, one for you, I think. Can I ask you to respond to the following question received, please? Is there any further update on the pay agreement for NJC staff? The last we heard was that Unison had put in a claim for 10%. The government have said a pay freeze, but £250 for those earning under 24,000. Do you have an update on that, please, and how that will be applied? Thank you.
Thank you. We do not anticipate a further update now until after the local elections at the earliest in May. In the current circumstances, and it's probably unlikely to be agreed for a further few months after the negotiations. Whilst we're yet to receive sort of the confirmation of any national agreement of 2022 pay award for either support or teaching staff, we understand that in consideration of the impact of the past 12 months, a lot of schools have budgeted and wish to apply a pay award for their staff, which may even be applied to some extent ahead of the national agreement. We have taken on board the feedback that we received over the implementation of the 2020-21 pay award, and we are committed to acting upon the feedback and have implemented a number of improvements to our processes and procedures to deliver a successful implementation of any future pay awards. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much, Matt. Okay, question we've received now, relates to recruitment processes. And the question is, can schools now be undertaking face-to-face interviews or sort of recruitment processes back in school now, or are they being done remotely? Perhaps, Elaine, this is one that you could pick up to begin with, but it might be one that then, Beth, you might have a view on it as well, I think, from a safeguarding perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We're, as things are returning to normal, we are getting asked this question more and more, and it's not a straight answer really at the moment. The national DfE guidance, I did check it a few days ago, and it still remains the same in terms of that they are advising schools to continue to limit the number of visitors that attend, and therefore they've suggested it's appropriate for you to consider a flexible approach to interviews for school-based positions. We know that we've managed to undertake interviews in alternative ways to the usual face-to-face. So potentially we know a lot of schools are continuing with the online recruitment campaigns at the moment, just because of the limiting of the visitors, and also because of all the restrictions in the schools about the bubbles that still exist in terms of who they can see and where they can go within the school environment. So what are they actually gaining by coming into the school setting? So we know some are doing it, but they are restricted in terms of what they can do. But as I say, the government is saying restrict your visitors and think about alternatives still, and that is very much firmly on their guidance that they updated only last week. I think Beth probably might even want to touch on this from a safer recruitment perspective.
I am, yes, thank you very much, Elaine. So as a lot of you will be aware, for DBS purposes, we've had to do face-to-face, not face-to-face, but virtual ID checking, and that's still very much in play at the moment as well. So, but I think going forward, as we gradually come out of what we're in, we're going to see a much more blended approach to this, and I think after attending the DBS Roadshow at the end of March, certainly the DBS are looking at lots of changes bringing in relation to what they've had to deal with during COVID. So I think it's a case of really watch this space. As soon as we know things, we will be bringing it out to you in either one of our advice notes or our updates anyway. But I think it is absolutely, as Elaine has done, as previously stated, but we just need to keep the safeguarding high on everybody's agenda, make sure the cultures within our schools are what we would want them to be able to make sure children are safe at the end of the day as well. All right, thanks ever so much. Thanks both Elaine and Beth on that one, that's really great. Okay, question we've received is one for Simon and follows on from discussion about the outdoor play equipment. The question is that we took our outdoor play equipment out of use as we cannot ensure cleaning between every group. What is your thoughts on bringing these safely back into use? Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, it can be a challenge. Some equipment is hard to clean. Ultimately, the guidance gives you two options for cleaning equipment. Yes, you should be cleaning it more regularly than normal, but a lot of the key here is in terms of what you do with that equipment between bubble groups, because that, the bubble obviously acts as something of a fire barrier between spreading between those different bubbles. What a lot of schools are doing is they will, if it's play equipment that's sort of plastic hoops and things, they'll often allocate equipment to a bubble group that stays within that bubble, stays within the bucket, and is perhaps cleaned daily. If it's larger equipment such as trim trails and climbing frames and things, obviously cleaning it much harder. So what a lot of schools have done is they're taking on board the guidance about isolating equipment between different groups. So they will tend to allocate the trim trail or that equipment to a group for say a week, and then they'll leave it to isolate over the weekend, and then it goes to another group the following week. Remember, the key is if you can't clean it thoroughly between bubbles, it's leaving it unused for a period of 48 hours unless it's plastic, in which case it's 72 hours. So there are options. You just have to sort of work within those parameters to find something that will work safely for you and your school. Okay. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks ever so much, Simon. That's really helpful. Okay, so another question we've received. We haven't had too much of a focus on COVID this time. It's been a little bit more broader than the previous Q&A sessions, but this one does bring us back to being COVID related. The question we've received is about long COVID, and I know our team have been experiencing quite a large number of questions from customers with employees suffering from long COVID. And this one is asking, how do we manage somebody with long COVID? Can we manage their absence? Elaine, could you pick this one up, please?
Yes, Alex, I will. Yeah, it does seem to be a very unfortunate consequence of the infectious COVID, this long COVID, and very little's known about it at the moment, as the audience will be aware. The difficulty is the term at the moment, long COVID, is it really doesn't have any official recognition as a medical term at the moment. And whilst there are different arrangements in place for those who are suffering from infectious COVID, in terms of their contractual pay and absence triggers and guidance on that, there isn't really for long COVID. What we are finding then is those that are actually suffering from long COVID, our advice to those individuals is that they should treat it, the employers, that they should treat it as any other absence, really. You should be keeping in touch, consider appropriate support, agree at return to work as and when they can. But in terms of managing the absence and whether you should be using the triggers in your absence policy for progressing through to maybe an informal stage absence meeting and more formal stages, then you should be progressing that. So the government haven't made any reference to long COVID, and local government association that we keep an eye on in terms of their advice, again, they haven't submitted any guidance out for us to consider as employees at the present time. So as I say, just in summary, it's a standard management absence in terms of long COVID if someone's not able to attend work.
Thanks ever so much, Elaine. Bit of a technical glitch there, but I think we could all hear Elaine just fine, so that's great. Okay, so I think we're just about to conclude the session a little bit earlier than we'd hoped. It's been very quiet on the questions front today. Usually we have far more questions than we've been bombarded with today. So do feel free to post a question now if you've got any more, and we're here available to pick them up. But in the meantime, can I just take the opportunity to remind you that to watch the education updates if you haven't already done so. These are fantastic 4 sessions delivered by our experts, which address key updates and considerations for school leaders for the term ahead. As customers, you'll have direct access to these from the webinar tabs on EPM website, and for non-customers watching, you can view these through our April edition of the Education Insights under Guides and Resources page on www.epm.co.uk. And also for customers, please do access the Education Insights if you haven't done so already. It's the EPM monthly magazine that we produce, full of articles which are really useful and relevant across the sector. We do invite opportunities to have guest writers for that. So if there is anybody who has a burning desire or an article that they'd like to share with us, please make contact with us, and we'd be pleased to consider your articles to add into the magazine. So, in the absence of any more questions, thank you once again for joining us today. If you could fill out the very short questionnaire that we have linked to the chat function, we'd be hugely grateful to receive any feedback on this session. And remember, if you're a customer, a copy of the recording will be made available on the EPM website under the webinar tab. Thanks for your time again today. Please don't hesitate to contact us if there's anything further we can be of assistance with. Thank you. Bye for now.